Good afternoon, everyone. Good to see you all. I've got my bright color jumper on today to keep everybody alive and awake.
Can't miss you.
So what I want to talk to Kevin about today is about researching crypto. You know, I came into the space, as you know, I've been in the space for a long time, 2013. At that point, it was really easy. It was just Bitcoin. So we had to get our heads around that. And then it broadened out last year, and many of us got into Ethereum. And I started to put together a macro framework for Ethereum, Metcalfe's law, and a way of understanding it. And then suddenly it exploded. It exploded with so many protocols, so many things going on, layer ones, layer twos, NFTs, DeFi, and I just couldn't keep up with it. And I think everybody's struggling with the same thing, as this space is moving so fast, the complexity is enormous, but the opportunities are equally enormous. So we need to figure out how we look at this stuff now, because it's not just about Bitcoin and Ethereum or buying, a crypto punk. It's a whole lot more. So I wanted to get Kevin on to talk about how he approaches research. So first, Kevin, we've known each other for a while now.
Quite a bit now. It's been a long time coming to get us, I think, on stage together.
Yeah.
And it's funny how this kind of relationship came about, right? I, being a macro strategist in a prior life, you and I got connected, I think it was through Anthony Pompliano at the time. You had been in New York, right? You were doing the interviews. We'd gone back and forth a bit before then. And I had been following, you, and I've been a Real Vision subscriber for a number of years now from that more kind of macro or traditional investing perspective. Saw you started to have that glimmer in your eyes about going down this rabbit hole, and now I think it's safe to say you're pretty red-pilled at this point when it comes to crypto. But no, it was a very organic relationship, I think, where I was looking to you for macro insights, how you were thinking about this, because you bring an incredible perspective to this space, and myself and what I really serve as a vessel for the rest of our team at Delphi. We were originally started from a small cohort of people that came from that traditional finance lens. We're trying to bridge that gap for institutions, but really investors coming into crypto and Web3 almost 4 years ago now. And the blend of the macro, the bottom-up approach that we're taking here, and the culmination of all of that, I think, is one of the reasons why we've been going back and forth for a while now, figuring out how we can, do more together, how we can present these types of events.
Because once I got to the end of my knowledge ability, I had to reach out to you, because Remy, who works with me at Global Macro Investor, were like, okay, how the hell does this work? I think it was Nexus Mutual was the first one.
I think so.
That we all looked at together.
Yep.
And we got you guys to write a guest piece in Global Macro Investor. And increasingly, I've come to you guys at Delphi because I just don't understand it. And you've got, I don't know, how many people have you got now?
So we have almost 80 people globally now. And we started with 5 of us in a 4-person WeWork, probably, again, 3.5 years ago. And we have, just to give quick background on who we are at Delphi, we started with this research product, again, to try and bridge that gap, create quote-unquote institutional grade research for institutions, sophisticated investors that we knew were going to come into this space at a certain point. That has since grown into what we consider this kind of 3-headed hydra of Delphi, where we still have the research subscription business, but we also have a labs division, which is incubating projects and protocols, identifying gaps in the market and actually building those teams from the ground up and those products from the ground up. And we also have a venture arm where we're investing financial and intellectual capital into some of the projects that we think are really kind of moving the needle, within this space.
Yeah, because you've become the expert's expert, right? Everybody comes here. It's kind of freaky now, because considering when I first knew you, you just started a research service. Next minute, you're designing protocols for some of the most complex DeFi protocols in the world and all sorts of other stuff.
Yeah, and it was a pretty natural evolution where, as we were doing and kind of building out that research business initially, we had always had the intention and always, promised our early members that we were going to stay as objective as possible, right? That was our goal, was to try and cut through the noise and be some type of kind of guiding light for what was actually happening on the ground. And one of the things that we really kind of differentiated ourselves early on with was doing a lot of this bottom-up analysis and token economic work and trying to pioneer valuation techniques for this space, right? And even today, that's still very much a moving target, but trying to put more data-driven, analysis around how to think about this space and how to think about this new class of assets that was coming to market. And as we were doing that, we started to get approached by some of these prominent protocols, specifically in DeFi, at least initially, that were reading our research, seeing that no one was really talking about, I don't even know if tokenomics was a term at that point, thinking about token design, how to design these incentive systems, how to really kind of pour fuel on the fire of what it is that you as a project or protocol are trying to do. And they said, listen, we know you don't do paid research. We're not looking for that, but do you have any type of advisory or consulting business where you can help us think through this, right? Whether it's token design from the ground up or restructuring what we already have to help us think through this, right? Because a lot of these teams, especially in the early days, had all the tech talent and dev talent and the vision for what they wanted to build right there at their fingertips, and they had that in-house. The missing kind of piece there was having somebody with a bit more of a, we'll call it financial or economic background to think through, again, incentive design and put together that process for them. So that spawned our consulting division, which eventually turned into this labs division that I mentioned, where now, again, we're actually building and getting our hands dirty in our entire labs team, headed by Jose Macedo and Luke Saunders on our European side of our team. They're really pioneering, again, new different kind of token launch mechanisms, building these protocols. And one thing I think that has really kind of differentiated us and what's fed back into our research, for example, is we're not just talking about this stuff and reading about this stuff. We're very, very active in this space, right? And by we, again, vessel for the broader Delphi team of 75 plus at this point, where we're in these discords, we're talking to these project teams, we're actually interacting with these assets, we're providing liquidity to these different DEXs and these AMMs. We're actually doing it hands-on because that's the best way to learn in this space, right? It's not something you can simply just read about or read a white paper on and go, okay, I think that makes sense. You actually have to interact with these things. And so naturally that gravitated into the venture side, which was we want to be able to really kind of pour fuel on the fire of these teams that we think are moving the needle, that have something innovative, have something novel. And so we look at it today and look back, and the three-headed hydra it's great. And we've had modest success with that so far, but the evolution of it was pretty natural.
So talk to me about your research journey. So you come out of traditional macro, like me. What do you think you can offer the space? And then suddenly, what's your journey for that and then your understanding?
Yeah, so
how did you do it?
Yeah, I mean, I personally initially, like many of us, kind of saw Bitcoin came on my radar back in 2013. That was when it spiked above $1,000. I think it was $1,000 at that point. Was seeing it all over CNBC and Bloomberg, and to be honest, I completely dismissed it. I thought it was fake internet magic money. Did none of my own due diligence, right?
So this is the Kevin that's wearing the shirt and tie in the thumbnails, right?
This is the headshot. This is the Kevin headshot, yes. And a friend had put it back on my radar, I guess you could say, in 2016. And my first reaction was, how is this thing still around? Like, how is this not dead yet? And I started to come at it almost from a skeptical standpoint and said, okay, let me dig in here at least just to understand what the argument is for this, to maybe make an argument against it, because at that point, again, I didn't have a very good understanding of it. And from a macro perspective, right, and I know this is kind of how you got into it as well, very quickly you realize that Bitcoin initially was one of the most interesting assets, one of the most unique assets I'd ever come across. And it also solved a lot of problems that we'd all been thinking about or talking about that we didn't really have an outlet for, right? There was no way to express that thesis in what I thought was a very kind of levered way. So Bitcoin comes on my radar, and at the same time, my founding partners and I, all of us are kind of falling down this rabbit hole, right? We're starting to trade Bitcoin, get into it. This is late 2016, early 2017. We're investing in ETH. We rode the whole ICO wave up in 2017, I'm sure many of us here did. We're trading a bunch of, for lack of a better word, shit coins on the way up, held a lot of them on the way down, experienced that entire kind of wave. And in part it was, again, we kind of came in thinking this was a bit speculative, right? And that was an example of people starting to interact with these protocols themselves.
But even here, again, I'm going to keep doing this, right? It's like Uniswap. Everyone kind of knows the name, but then when people try and use it and nobody understands all of this, right? At every layer, there's a new word you have to learn, a new complexity, and you somehow have to build a framework around it.
The value of, and this is not a shill of Delphi research, the value of Delphi research is we take you on that journey with us.
Oh, I get that.
So we'll build the thesis, and then
But how do we do it? So we've got to look, we've got to Luna, right? We all agree this is a great project, right? You guys are early because you see it early. We all want to be early in these projects, in these good projects. You've spoken to the community. Then we used a bunch of words we didn't understand. And we're still sitting here scratching our heads saying, okay, so do I buy this or not?
So,
you've got to help me here, man.
I know I do. So, one, all right, let's use Lunaterra as an example. We come out with a report, right? The point of what we're trying to do at Delphi is not only give you early insights into what we think is going to be the next big thing, right? And really trying to find these diamonds in the rough, but we're also trying to help people come up with that framework for evaluating it, right? And the way in which we do that is through the research itself, right? So if you read a report, let's say on Avalanche, you read a report on Terra, the information that we include in there, which we have sources on, we tell you where we're finding this information from, right? Sometimes it might not be the easiest thing for people to be able to pull and track themselves, but we're giving you the tooling, hopefully for you to be able to go on and say, okay, this is a project I want to follow, and I now know how to follow it going forward, and how our team, which is not necessarily the be-all, end-all, but how our team is thinking about the thesis around that protocol, that project, that dApp that's being built. And we're trying to, again, lead the horse to water, not necessarily make you drink, but give you that framework for starting to think about how to evaluate these things. And I know it sounds vague and opaque, and the reason for that is, depending on what it is you're looking at, dictates how you start to kind of build a framework or thesis around this, right? And what a lot of crypto and Web3 comes down to is incentives, right? And where the incentives lie and how that token is designed to pour fuel on that fire to accelerate, whether it's the adoption or bootstrap a protocol to do what it is trying to do.
So the thesis you're trying to build is, okay, this thing has got adoption, and we know what they're talking about, and what they're doing, decent quality people around it, and this is what it's trying to solve. Mm-hmm. Is it doing it?
Right. And is it doing it is a really important part of that too, right? Because a lot of times what you often see is really, really good ideas on paper that actually aren't seeing a lot of adoption. And part of that might just be because people don't know about it, right? People don't know this protocol or this application exists. Part of it might just be something that causes us to dig in deeper and go, okay, why aren't people using this? This is actually a well-known name. Why aren't people using this? And from that, the insights that we're able to kind of garner is the way in which we try and, again, cut through the noise of you're hearing a whole lot about X project, but what we found, at least in our research, is this isn't being used, but this might actually be a better version of that people are starting to wake up to. And we're trying to help, again, guide people towards where we think that they should spend their time or they should focus.
Yeah, because I was having some conversations earlier with some people outside, and people were like, how do I deal with this explosion? I'm like, I know how to deal with it, is you can only focus on what you think is interesting. Because even within that, be it DeFi, and I don't really care about DeFi because I'm a finance guy and so yields are boring to me, but for other people it's like, this is super amazing what they're building here. I'm now interested in social tokens and metaverse. It's something that you and I are both super interested in. But I think, and other people understand the layer ones and what the things it can solve. And I think that's the answer is first start with something you care about.
Yep.
That you can actually read stuff and think, I want to know more about that. What does it mean? Because if not, you can't do it.
You have to have the passion. Passion is so incredibly important for this. And I mentioned earlier, most of our new hires and people that we've brought into, I'm going to use it again, the Delphi hive mind, are people who are genuinely extremely passionate about whatever we'll call it subsector, their focus is. Yeah. And we try and give them...
So there's few generalists, they're mainly specialists now.
A lot, exactly, a lot of specialists.
You're the hand-waving generalist. Now,
what's interesting, though, is that a lot of these different trends like DeFi, NFTs, metaverse, there is a lot of overlap between them, right? And you're starting to see, and we're going to continue to see, applications that are being built, or even, we talk about like consumer-facing applications that are going to be built that will leverage the best of what tokens, non-fungible or fungible, allow you to do, and thinking about it from the perspective of what is it that you're trying to incentivize, and then using the different tooling to be able to do that, right? Whether it's NFTs, whether it's fungible tokens. So all these different layers of the stack that are being built in this kind of Web3 context, there is some overlap to it. And what we try to have is somebody who's a point person or an expert on each, so that when there is that case of overlap, those two people can come together and talk out, what's actually happening here.
One of the areas that I've kept away from, not just because it's just yields, but it's DeFi, because you need to understand the different risks. Why are you getting the yield? There's a complexity to that as well, right?
There's a complexity to it, and there is a lot of risk, right? And that's something that we try and stress. Some of these high, crazy, eye-popping yields that you see, oftentimes it's being quoted in, an APY, right? What you can expect to get on an annualized basis if you provide liquidity or you do something within this DeFi protocol to earn that yield. And oftentimes it's being distributed in the native token itself, right? And that's why it's such an because there's a ton of supply that's coming to market very soon. So some of those opportunities might be more kind of short-term trading opportunities. What you've seen develop in DeFi is this concept of kind of mercenary capital, right? Where
what is that all about?
Everyone's
kind of the instant rug pull.
It's not necessarily a rug pull. It's the fact that because a lot of these things are frictionless, right? For me to be able to port assets, and I know the UI and the UX is still not, it's far from perfect, but it's relatively frictionless, especially when you look at the traditional, finance industry, or I should say financial system. Because it's frictionless in a sense, you're seeing people basically chasing the best, highest opportunity in short-term timeframes, right? So mercenary capital means there is no reason for them to stick around when the rewards themselves start to run out or too many people are coming in and they've diminished the amount of yield that person can earn. This ties us back to the community aspect like you were talking about, where there's a lot more focus now on how do you not only bring capital into what you're trying to do or capitalize what you're trying to do, but how do you keep people around, right? And how do you create the right incentives so that, and there's some type of community feel to whatever it is you're building, so that it isn't this short-term kind of trading opportunity. You're trying to bring real people in that can provide some type of, whether it's contribution, expertise, whether it's providing actual liquidity to these protocols that keeps them around, not just for the next 3 months, but for the next 3-5 years.
I think one of the key phrase for the last 3 days is community. Is you didn't really need to know about the Bitcoin community or the Ethereum community to understand the asset. You could chart it, had a price history. A lot of this stuff doesn't have much price history. Some of it's like 6 months old. So it's difficult to use the contextualization that we're used to. Ethereum and Bitcoin were easy for that. And you didn't really need to know about the community so much, except understand the asset and is it growing. But community is vital in all of this, in everything, even these DeFi protocols, single DeFi protocols that can be a small project. It's all about that community, right? Mm-hmm.
Because one of the big unlocks of crypto and Web3, right, is by giving, we've talked about universal basic equity, right? In a sense of...
Not stealing my term. Watch him.
Look at this. You want tokenomics too?
You can have that one.
Okay. The big unlock, though, right, is you're able to actually give these contributors quite quickly, honestly, if you get into these. If it's a lot of talk about price and it's a lot of talk about, what the next, drop is, or like, how do we continue to do more and more? Sometimes that can seem almost, cash grabby in a sense, right? Where it's not about, the true community that is at the center of it. Whereas you have the other ones that you have these evangelists who come in and...
So if they talk about price more than they talk about the applications and the new thing that's happening, and then that's a red flag to you.
What's happening, right, exactly. And so the reason why it is, again, it's opaque and it's vague is that it's a spectrum, right? And so part of this is subjective, where you go in, you start talking to community members, you say, why are you passionate about this? What is the big unlock? And sometimes they'll give you something that you hadn't thought of before, that you just weren't aware of, because you're just starting on this journey of trying to figure out what this protocol, this project or application is trying to do. And that's where some of the research journey actually starts, where you're actually talking to people who are either using this, you're using it yourself, or you're talking to the founding team about what it is that they're building, and you can start to sense, right, who's getting good engagement, but who's also getting a strong following, and for what reason, right? And sometimes there's certain things, again, that they just come off wrong, and they don't have, the community isn't about the size of it, it's about the quality of it and the people who are around that table.
Because I see an enormous amount on Twitter, and I'm starting to filter stuff, but I'm still finding it hard. Like, Luxo is one that, I interviewed in the platform, and I just can't tell whether it's just a community that's hoping for something to happen, or there is anything happening at all.
Yeah.
And even speaking to the founder, it wasn't clear to me.
Yeah.
And
what did he point you to? Like, what was that conversation like?
The white paper that everybody clings on to in the community on Twitter was about social tokens and about fashion and culture and this stuff. The interview was about identity. And when I asked questions, those things didn't match up. So I'm like, I mean, he's a smart guy.
Sure.
You know, he built the ERC20 token, designed it. But what he's talking about was different what the community's talking about. So then I'm trying to think, and nothing's really been launched. So in which case, it's a total shot in the dark now because the expectations. So that's what put a red flag. Not that I know that it's bad or good. I'm just like, I'm not involved.
I think part of this too is there's no way to know for certain, like what's, especially in the early stages, like what's going to take off, what's going to get, we'll say, mainstream within the Web3 and crypto community adoption and really kind of turbocharge or accelerate the amount of engagement that they're driving. It's very difficult to tell that early on. And so in that instance, right, maybe it's not necessarily a red flag and they could be doing something incredible. It's almost a wait and see, right? Yeah. A big part of this, and it goes back to the question earlier about like kind of managing risk, and there is a lot of risk in this, is how do you try and come up with the highest kind of probability bet that you say, listen, there are X, Y, and Z reasons why this might fail. And that's a big part of our research process too, is how does this fail? Like what are the biggest challenges that they're either facing now, they're going to face, or what does the competitive landscape look like for this, right? Because as you have by definition more exponential growth around these things, right? And this whole concept of composability, having an understanding of kind of the bigger landscape of what's being built and what's been tried and what hasn't, which again is very difficult at this point for one individual person, unless you're focusing on a specific subsector that you're passionate about, which is really, really great because you can actually carve out a name for yourself within the space as an independent person who's just very in the weeds on social tokens, for example, right? Having an understanding of that landscape is also really important because then you can try to suss out who's doing something better than somebody else, or who's starting to get adoption versus somebody else. And you start to weigh the probabilities of success with each of these individual projects. And those are the ones you start to lean into where it's like, we don't know if this is going to be a guaranteed success, but we think it's a much higher probability that this is an undiscovered or under the radar type of token that you should be looking at versus the one over here where there were a handful of, we'll call them red flags, right? But just things that we couldn't necessarily make sense of yet. And it's a wait and see game there. It's on the radar, but it's not something that we're focused on. Whereas this is much further along, has a much clearer path to adoption, has a really strong kind of burning community around them, and are doing things that we would consider to be pushing towards that North Star that they have.
Yeah, the other one that, I don't do many of these interviews on platform because I'm just not the skilled person to do it, but John from Avalanche, that was interesting because he came on and he's ex-Tiger Management, he's from the world that I know, he's a very well-respected guy, and now he's running this project, and I was like, what are you solving? And it's like speed. And I didn't know what speed, who was going to use that extra speed for what? And he started to show that they had some network growth, but it wasn't. So I just put it on the radar screen. And then I saw people talking about, people are going to start using this chain. It's starting to get used. And you start seeing the numbers, and the numbers exploded really quick. And then I will think about investing because I suddenly saw, okay, here was something I didn't know, didn't really understand, but there is adoption happening now. And smart people I know, I can see on Twitter, are now talking about it.
And that's, again, when I said it's subjective around the health of a community, what you saw, Avalanche is a great example of that, where as you started to see that gain traction, gain real, again, kind of on-chain activity and transaction value, right? As that started to grow, you had very smart people and a community started to build around Avalanche, what they were building, and that almost served as an accelerant for more people to come in, right? And as that started to develop, then you started to see different like DeFi starting to get built, those applications starting to get built on top of that provided more functionality. We talked about Terra and Luna earlier, right? We at Delphi Labs, it's been a big focus of ours and our team, and We have a handful of protocols that are going live very soon that are kind of helping to build out that DeFi ecosystem on Terra. And part of that too, though, is like it has a really strong community, right? And so community almost begets more community in a weird way, right? And I feel like, again, I don't want to overuse that term, but it is largely about the community you can rally around it, because those are the people who are going to not only evangelize it, but help you push forward and attract more people to go build on top of your protocol, right? If you're an Avalanche, if you're a Terra. And so it's being able to start to track those early on, maybe have them on the radar. And then once you hit that kind of inflection point of, there's something bigger here, right? That, again, could be a bit speculative. A lot of this is still quite speculative, but it's now worthy of us maybe taking a bet on, because we see what this could become, and they're moving in the right direction. They're doing all the right things to really grow, that ecosystem, that ecosystem on top of the protocol that they're pushing for.
The other one that really interests me, because it was the complete opposite, is Doge. Right? Everybody hates it. It's the ultimate meme token, but has one of the largest communities, and it's a one-sided community. It's a bunch of investors who know it's a joke and are enjoying it and enjoying the fact that it goes up. And so I, like everybody else, was kind of laughing at it until Mark Cuban goes, yeah, I'm going to accept Doge at every Mavs game. I'm like, oh, I get it. If there is a one-sided chain like that people are passionate about, that just has retail investors, all you need to do is give them applications to use for it. And that's when Elon Musk comes into it and says, with a bit of retooling, we could use this. And my guess, he's actually telling us that they're going to use it for whether it's streaming car payments. It's a fascinating thing, because the industry hates stuff like that, but I think it makes me laugh, because that's what the industry is about as well. The meme stuff is real.
It absolutely is real, right? Talk about culture is an investable asset class at this point, right? Meme culture is an investable asset class. Doge itself, what is actually, again, the silver lining in all of that is a lot of, call it smart, sophisticated investors that looked at that and said it is total garbage, right? They're the ones who kind of missed out on that run. Now, eventually things can get a little too speculative, right? And there's always going to be somebody who's kind of buying at the top and is kind of FOMOing in too late. But, in the aggregate, it's a really interesting kind of experiment around this, because, and it goes back to the point of this space, especially right now, very much favors the individual over the institution, right? And it's how we've tried to build up our team at Delphi, where we give all of our analysts, everybody who's within Delphi has a ton of autonomy, almost by definition, because it allows you to go and explore these different worlds, right? These different corners of this market that we can move on quickly, or we can put out a report on relatively quickly, that you as the individual, by just getting involved and just starting and just, again, joining these discords and starting to interact with stuff, following people on Twitter and commenting, right? And just tracking and what's happening in crypto Twitter land, there is so much alpha to be had.
Find crypto Twitter better generally than Discord?
You want us to sit? Yeah, sit, stand, whatever you want. One last time. 2 years I've been waiting for this. I just saw my first concert recently, and finally my first conference. So we want to finish this off with something very special and a little bit fun, and with an all-star panel. So you've probably already seen them, but you know Bill Tai from Astai Global, Alex Mashinsky, Celsius Network. I should probably go in order. Pippa Malgrim from Monaco Foundry. And joining me on stage for the first time, John Cropper, Futurlogic Advanced Concepts. 22, the word.
Renaissance.
Oh. Of?
That's a good one.
We have to inject optimism into the culture. So in essence, what happened is 3 pandemics happened at the same time. A biological one,
Okay.
an environmental one,
And a social
and a
one?
cultural one. Massive schism all over the place. And typically after really dark times like that, the society emerges, Renaissance period, Age of Enlightenment after the Black Plague.